strategic vision for the coming years. A document entitled Perspectives 2024-2030. It is intended to be a kind of roadmap for religious institutes here who wish to embrace the challenge of maintaining a relevant presence in the future of this world.
5 perspectives have been identified as both conviction and challenges: transmission, transition and transformation, relevance and witness, solidarity among members, and partnership. And especially this year, we are focusing on the challenge of transmission. At the beginning of the year, we listened to the testimony of congregation committed to the effort of transmission. It is essentially a matter of trust, which in French, confiance means having faith with, that allows us to lift our head and believe that the Spirit will take what we desire to offer and make it even better in the hands of others. Je vous précise un petit détail avant d'aller plus loin. La semaine dernière, nous devions avoir la présence du frère.
We were supposed to have Brother Daniel Cadrin with us last week to shed light on this theme of transmission through the history of consecrated life. This presentation has been somewhat delayed, and we will inform you of his new contact details soon. And we will also send you information about when that presentation will take place. And this morning, we are delighted to welcome Madame Solange Lefebvre, who has been invited to answer the question, what does it mean to transmit, and what does the desire to transmit imply? So I will now leave it to my colleague Danielle to begin with a prayer, then introduce Solange and welcome her on our behalf. Thank you very much, Alain. Before introducing you to Solange, I have the pleasure of knowing her from my parish. I would ask you to join me in a moment of prayer. We're at the beginning of Advent, so Eve will share the screen with the prayer. You will see the prayer in both languages, and I would just ask you to pray this prayer individually in silence. You will see it on the screen.
Oui, oui, c'est bon.
So it is with great joy, as Alain just said, to welcome Madame Solange Lefebvre, full professor at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, Institute of Religious Studies at the University of Montreal, and holder of the chair in Cultural and Religious Diversity Management. The chair is dedicated to the study of religion in the public sphere. Miss Lefebvre's expertise is sought after by public and private institutions, community and religious groups, and the media. Director of the Center for the Study of Religions at the University of Montreal from 2000 to 2008. In 2019, she established a new center, the Center for the Study of Religions and Spiritualities. Solange has completed more than 30 research projects and published more than 200 papers. She has distinguished herself through her studies on secularization and secularism, Christian secularity, the new challenges posed by religious diversity to states, as well as on young people and intergenerational relationships. Thank you very much, Solange, for being with us today. We are very much looking forward to hearing your presentation. Thank
Merci
you
beaucoup,
very much, Danielle.
Daniel. Merci.
Thank you, Father Ambeau,
Rambo.
and thank you to all of the those who are present. I'm going to say a few words in English
Avant de mettre le
and then
PowerPoint,
a few words in French.
so welcome and thank you to be here. I don't know where you are in Canada, but I'm always happy to talk with everyone in Canada in all provinces and territories. So thank you so much to be here. Merci beaucoup. Je ne savais pas
I
que
didn't know that I had been assigned a theme that had to do with your vision going forward all the way till 2030. I think that religious communities are great experts in transmission, and I'm looking forward
dans
to hearing
l'échange,
you.
I consider that the religious communities, Catholic religious communities, are experts of transmission. In fact, I didn't know when they invited me that it was part of your big mission until 2030, but I'm very honored to offer a few reflections on this very important theme. Alors, avant de mettre le
So
PowerPoint,
before putting my slides up on the screen, I would like to, because
vous savez,
the desire to transmit is psychoanalytic to a certain extent. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but I think that religious communities desire to transmit. I think all human beings have a desire to transmit in many different ways.
my reflection is that religious communities are de facto, by definition, transmitting communities, the desire to transmit like any human being. Alors là, j'arrête de
So I'm
parler.
going to stop speaking bilingually now and continue in French. I will allow the interpreters to do their job from here on
I hope they can
in.
translate easily what I'm gonna say. They have my text,
The
but I could go out a little bit of my text. Alors, j'aime bien, moi,
I
commencer
like to
par
start
l'étymologie.
with
Vous connaissez
etymology.
l'étymologie.
When we talk about etymology, we're talking about the roots of
Pour le
language.
français, ça se
And
traduit
for
en
French,
français,
it's
mais
Greek and Latin above
je vais
all.
regarder
And I was
en
looking at the
dialecte
verb
français. Je
transmit. What
viens
does it mean to
du
transmit?
texte
Actually,
classique dans
its
l'étymologie. Vous allez voir
etymological origin is instructive. The source
matin, c'est
word is
transmettre.
mettre, transmettre, mettre,
C'est simple, hein, mettre, mettre.
Mettre.
Donc, c'est le mot
This is
soumis.
from the Latin
Mais vous allez
mettere,
voir que
but
parmi
not
les
far from mettere
étymologies,
there is
il y a
missus,
et
and
ensuite
that
qui veut
and
dire
that means
laisser aller,
to let go, to
lâcher,
release. And then
envoyer,
it became to send. So very interesting. Missio, as in
dans
sending.
transmission. Et puis, d'où mission.
And
Et là,
I'm
je
sure
suis certaine que vous
you
connaissez
know
la
this
mission.
word, especially the word
Mission veut
mission,
dire
which comes
envoyer.
from missio, which means to send
On est
out.
dans quand même
So
un sens
we're
ici
in a very religious definition
hein,
when we look at the origins. Sending of catechumens after the readings during liturgical celebrations, after the liturgy of the word, catechumens would leave. And so it was the sending out. And so basically, what emerges from the networks of words that come from it is something very active and dynamic. It is a verb that is well suited to religious communities. So renaître, remettre, soumettre, all of these words come from mettre, come from mettere, démettre, omettre, which is omit, émetteur, and emitter. These are all very active verbs that mean that we are sending out, we are communicating a message. So this verb is very active and dynamic. I think that the desire to transmit, to communicate is there, and I think there is something profoundly spiritual and religious. I think of religious communities not just as active and dynamic, but even as hyperactive. Uh, Religious communities accomplish a great deal. And I read in the prayer just now references to anxiety having a lot to do. So that's how I think of religious communities. So I'm going to begin my PowerPoint now. You'll see the slides on the screen. And there is a little bit of translation into English. Not all of it is translated, but it may help the Anglophones to follow along with the slides. Here we go. One moment. So I'm going to try to put it in presentation mode. We're going to do like catechumens do, send it out in a clear fashion. One moment. Let me know whether this works. There we go. Can you see the slides clearly?
On n'a simplement pas la bonne image. Donc,
We have,
faudrait sélectionner pas l'image
we would ask you maybe to select
oui,
the,
ça. Pas du présentateur.
yes, go ahead, Danielle. The screen we see now, up above, we see paramètres d'affichage, parameters. You can click on basculer. Is that better? Yes, that's better. Now we see it as we should. Perfect. Thank you very much. Here we go. So this was the title that was suggested to me. I am drawing in part on my book on the cultures and spiritualities of young people. The title, I always regretted having chosen this title because this book speaks a lot about transmission. And I reflected a lot on this with my students, also with Jacques Grandmaison in the 90s. For 10 or 15 years, it was an issue that was at the heart of my work as an academic, and we will be exploring this together. So I include a number of different perspectives, including that of intergenerational issues and transmission, which I have been, as I said, reflecting on for several years. And I propose that the question of transmission be based on three main theoretical pillars, namely the stages of life, generations and intergenerational relationships, and Christian religious transmission. I will be looking at that as well. And I will be speaking to you about some issues I see for religious communities, challenges for religious congregations. So, the first pillar, stages of life. Many of you probably know Eric Erickson. He's very interesting on a psychological and individual level. He has thought a great deal about the stages of life, and his approach is very close to Christianity. He has thought a lot about stages of life. As I just said, you probably are familiar with this concept, the stages of life. The adult stage of life involves generativity or stagnation. You see this on the screen. You see it also in English. And Erickson works in pairs, positive and negative, suggesting that there are complex relationships between the two. On the positive side, adults who experience generativity want to contribute to the world through work, commitment, and family. What drives them is feeling productive, recognized, and creative. We're talking about the adult stage here. So adults want to contribute to the world through work, commitment, family, in your case, through their participation in a religious community. They want to feel productive, recognized, and creative. So we're at the heart of this phase of transmission, the very active phase of transmission in life. The ultimate stage would be ego integrity rather than despair. This is the binomial here, the pair, the duo. people looking back on their lives either feel a sense of accomplishment or they experience regret or they oscillate between the two. There's not usually one pure feeling that is unadulterated. There's usually a mix of feelings. We can experience both at the same time or one more than the other. Of course, acceptance of life is of death, sorry, is a very important part of this. And so I would argue that we are currently witnessing a prolongation of adulthood into the late 70s and 80s. We know people who are in their 90s or even over 100. Members of religious communities have been at the forefront in this regard. Very active nuns and brothers in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s provide invaluable services and support their sense of generativity. And this is thanks to medical advances and better lifestyles, more healthy lifestyles. Longevity has increased for many people. Of course, it all depends on the type of work a person has done during their lifetime. But as long as a person feels that they are choosing their path to generativity, it is entirely possible to continue working well into old age. And I think that we are witnessing an era in which these last two stages, of course, there are a lot of sub-stages. We can't go into all of them, but I think that we are witnessing today uh, both generativity and integrity until very late in life. Uh, we continue to be very productive and sometimes even more productive and better, more wise after our 60s because of all the experience we have obtained. So I think this first pillar seems pretty basic. I imagine it does to you too. Then there's the concept of generation. This is the second pillar, the intergenerational pillar. And there are several issues here. There is a concept that we see in a lot of the documents of the UN, UNESCO, transmission to future generations as a large group, transmission to uh, all of humanity in terms of environment, sustainable development, transmission to younger generations in the workplace, in the family, in the religious community or circle of friends. And let's say right away that transmission to future generations as a global world relates mainly to the environment, an idea that has been developing rapidly since the 1970s in particular and includes all of humanity. But here I would like to reflect on the concept of generation. It is important to distinguish between the effects of age, generation, and period, even though the three interact. This helps. It's a key that I give to my students when I teach them. Age has an effect on the way we live our lives, a particular cohort. There are effects of age. The age we have uh, affects how we live, and also being from a particular sociological cohort, a particular generation affects how we live. Certain events that we experience.
And this cohort is living at the same time and sharing values and visions of life. The period is the historical context that can impact a generation. For instance, one may expect that pandemics, COVID-19, will have an impact on the younger cohorts because the younger people are absorbing more the impacts of such a phenomenon because they're at the learning stage. So the formative period will be between 15 and 25 years of age, but can the person change his or her values afterwards? Sure. People say that the old people are not changing and they are changing everything. No, that's not true. But before I talk about it, I would like to add one aspect about ages. And this is what I was saying in the beginning. As you're growing old, you are both part of generativity and integrity, meaning that the borders between ages are more blurred. So the transition between different ages is not always clear, and you don't have a clear initiation process, as we used to have in the traditional societies. There were common initiations for the groups that were passing from an age to the other. So there was a clear message about the meaning of a different age in a given society. Now we're having more of a progressive confirmation of people through the diplomas. Yes, the religious congregations are keeping initiation rites, but they've also increased this progressive confirmation that we find in our society. And now the periods of life are longer because people are living longer. Let's say that youth is not the only period when people are learning. That's also extraordinary. There are also changes at all periods of life. One of the theoreticians of generations, Karl Meinheim, said that experience gained within dynamic societies fosters a flexibility of mind under the influence of the younger generations. Older people prove to be adaptable in certain areas, while he noticed that it's the generations in the middle who are more rigid or more tied to their initial attitudes. There is a lot in common between the maturity and young people because people are able to take a distance from things. So you have developed some experience, especially if you're a person at maturity. And the people of a certain age are definitely able to learn, which is challenging the usual ways of thinking about ages. No, no. Getting old doesn't mean rigidity, at least not always. And something that's important to understand the various cultures, it's important to remember that the way we view life in the West is strongly marked by the value of autonomy. So it impacts the way we understand the different generations and the transition between generations. If you have people of different cultures in your communities, you know, North Americans are very much impacted by psychological, social, and economic autonomy. But this is not experienced in the same way across different cultures. Now, what about intergenerational relationships? So this is a quote. I'll read it in French and I'll post it in English later. So, all human institutions depend on the transmission. Families, schools, workplaces, states, religious groups are all institutions whose survival depends on the education and integration of young people. So Erickson, I'm quoting here again, who beautifully expressed this unavoidable challenge. So here you saw it in English, and I will now read it in French. During adolescence, the norms of childhood dependence begin to gradually reverse. It's no longer solely the responsibility of the elderly to teach the young the meaning of life. It is the young who, through their actions and reactions, make the elderly understand whether life, as it has been presented to them, holds a vital promise, and it's the young who carry within them the power to confirm those who confirm them, to renew, to regenerate, to disavow what is rotten, to reform, and to rebel. This dialectic reflects a back and forth movement between the tradition to be integrated and the modernity to be instilled. So, several experts reflecting on modernity acknowledge that progress or modernization is not a linear path. No, it's not because you're modern you move from A to B. No, this dynamics is constantly integrating both tradition and modernity. So we should speak more of a coexistence between heritage and innovation, and we will return to the religious dimension later. The value of autonomy that I was mentioning is being transmitted. There's an heritage of autonomy, but of course, our new tradition tells us to be at a distance from authority. But our insistence of autonomy belongs to the modern tradition, so we can't get rid of tradition that easily. Now, the concept of transmission. One of the notions that is the closest of the concept of transmission is what is called socialization. You see here a definition in French, and as I will read it, I'll show it in English. It is a word that is not synonym, but it's a way of explaining what transition is about. So, taken in the broader sense, the word socialization is defining the sociocultural process through which we are internalizing those. So think of religious congregations as I'm talking. So think of your long formation process, the way you're socializing in your community, the way that socializing is helping people to assimilate, to internalize as individuals the standards, the feelings, the values, attitudes, stereotypes, behaviors, and language that are common to that society. Socialization is considered fully successful when the individual acts and thinks spontaneously in accordance with the social norms or standards that have been instilled in them and believe they're doing it freely. That's important. Our society is often saying, so we got rid of this or that, but we're ignoring the traditions that are living in us and that we are continuing to live. And several researchers place greater emphasis on socialization as a reciprocal influence between individuals and society. So the individual evolves through a process of interplay between identification with their heritage and what we call self-definition. So the fact that we are building ourselves through the heritage and experimentation. As we're experimenting, we are trying some of the aspects that were transmitted to us. So we are transmitted today the importance of innovating, of forging our own path, but still our societies remain largely unchanged. They are largely still continuing many values. So we're living an interplay between tradition and innovation. So we're not completely leaving the tradition. And the taste for change is also a value that is being transmitted to us. Okay, so it's not too difficult to follow. So I suppose it's not too bad. Okay, so let's move on. In the notion of transmission, there are the generation relationships, and therefore several dynamics. Between generations, as we mentioned earlier, there is both a downward from the old to the young and upward from the young to the old transmission. So both downward and upward transmission and relationships based on solidarity between generations, reproduction, contestation, and competition between generations. This is really about the generational relationships. Of course, the family plays a key role, surrounded by adults and others who contribute within a wider circle. Already at adolescence, so already when people are teenagers, it's recognized that the young person should have different models than the adults in his or her own family. And as religious men and women, you all have histories where you were models for young people whom you met and even for peers of yours. So outside of the family, several adult people play this role of an adult that is transmitting. But there is a problem about generations in the modern society because the modern society tends to separate age groups by institutionalizing them. So, where are the very young people in our society? They're at daycare, and they are in institutions that are specialized for the youngest children. Then, where are the children? They're at school. The teenagers also at high school, and the young adults either at the workplace or still at school. And then you have the workplace for the adults and retirement. So when people become retired, go into retirement, they continue doing many things, but institutionally, the status of a retired person places them outside of the workplace. So there are separations between generations, and in order to maintain some intergenerational mixing, you need to develop specific projects, organize encounters between the generations. And with Jacques Grandmaison in the 1990s, so people in Quebec definitely heard about this research on generations. So we had presented intergenerational projects to break the generational ghettos that our society tends to build. Now, the need for models. The need for role models is a constant throughout life. So we see role models for this of that all our lives, and counter role models to which, of course, we don't want to become. I don't know if you have counter models. I had a few. I had beautiful models and also some counter models. But as a matter of fact, transmission is primarily driven by complex collectives. This is a major discovery that I made with other researchers on the workplaces. I was not working on religion, but I want to share this idea, this insight with you. In my book, I'm quoting Sharon Parks, and so I don't have this quote on my PowerPoint. So Sharon Parks had identified what she was calling the mentoring community. So we all often talk of the need for a mentor, the person who will train someone else, who will transmit something to someone else. But she said that it's more mentoring communities that really shape and help young people. And she said that it was in higher education that higher education played the role of an community of imagination. Then the professional environment was playing the role of a learning and initiation community. So we could add sports also that plays this role. Travel also. It's a major mentoring community that allows a second look at the uh, familiar universe. People in religious communities travel a great deal. It's opening their minds. Nature is also a unified community that transcends divisions and conflicts. Family, which is a vigilant community, can confirm the future of the young people, and communities of faith or religious conviction bear witness to the meaning given to various aspects of life and death. When I was working on generations, I gave a lot of thought to the question of mentorship. And I realized that the transmission of skills and values is more of a collective phenomenon. While some people do indeed seek out a mentor, many experience their learning differently. It's the group that is the mentoring community. And of course, religious communities are all mentoring communities. For example, when a young person arrives in an institution, they may encounter formal and structural transmission processes, but they also greatly benefit from people whom they will choose to receive, to learn from them about how to adapt, about knowing what they need to do. And In our research team, we identified several transmission profiles, so you have it on the screen in both languages. So the heteronomic attitude, which frequently relies on an external authority. So this is a person who's always afraid not to do things right. There are people like that that really rely on authority to take an initiative. That's a person we call heteronomic. So the rule comes from outside. Others have a more experimental attitude. They are much more autonomous. They learn out of experience by trial and mistake, trial and error. Then you have the attitude attached to teamwork, which seeks to benefit from all available resources. And finally, the attitude of the protégé, the protected one. So, a person who calls and assumes the support of a mentor. So now come to the Christian transmission, which is probably as important for you as it is for me. What's happening today? What about religion and Christian ideals in our context? Since this is what religious communities, and not only religious communities, but you have taken very important roles in several areas of life. But all that was just said can be applied to Christian transmission. The dynamics of tradition and innovation, of acceptance and rejection, the importance of generations, the mentoring communities, the family, the collective transmission, the various profiles of transmission, and so on. I like the concept of a mentoring community, and Christian communities represent a wonderful foundation for faith. Religious men and women have generally led lives that are rich in all kinds of transmission. They've experienced role models and counter models. They've passed on knowledge, values, and faith, and they have left their mark on the lives of countless people. So let's discuss some issues that are specific to the Christian religion in Quebec and also in Canada. I would name four. And there may be differences between provinces, so it's not part of my text, but I'm so sure translators will take this into account. The government support, the state support is very important. We are now at the era of personal conversion. There are effects of the devaluation of practices. So religious practices were devalued, and I'll share some statistics. First, the state or government support. We went to different places. In different places in Canada, we moved from a school taught at school to parish catechetics. So there are still Catholic schools in Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and a few places in Canada. There are still religious teaching in the Maritimes, but generally, religion is not being taught at schools. So the current period shows how religious transmission can be helped by government support.
Tant qu'un État soutient une ou des religions, qu'il assure sa transmission scolaire, qu'il paie ses leaders ou animateurs de pastoral, la transmission paraît se faire plus efficacement aussi dans les familles.
Quebec, for example, supported, Ontario did as well, and other provinces as well, supported this transmission in schools. But since the 90s, we've seen these school supports lessen, diminish, and we can talk about the subsequent steps that were taken. Even in Quebec, in Ontario, it's already the case. In Ontario, you have to pay 100% of tuition for private religious schools. In Quebec, there is still state support for private religious schools, but that is going to disappear soon. So the Catholic Church, in response to this, strengthened parish catechesis. And this is a lot of effort, requires a lot of effort from families. This is the great way that the faith is transmitted to younger generations through catechesis. So, although there have been successes in this area, it is foreseeable that the number of children receiving catechesis will decline as many parents relied solely on the school, or at least to a large extent, to transmit their faith. So we're seeing that there are a lot of changes at the family level. On a positive side, families who embark on a path of Christian initiation are very motivated. They do not do so out of respect for convention. They really want to transmit, to go back to the title of today's lecture. So this is not transmission because everyone else is doing it. It's not out of peer pressure. Another aspect of Christian catechetical transmission is that it has been known for some time that Christian initiation confined to childhood yields mixed results. Well, it is important to transmit religion during early childhood and later childhood. Completing this initiation in early adolescence means that religion becomes associated with the world of childhood. And it is important for teenagers and young adults to embrace the Christian faith in a way that is appropriate for their stage of life. Some parishes offer these opportunities, while others do not. So now I'm arriving to a point B, option, decision, conversion. As a result of the loss of state support, we are seeing an increase in the number of people seeking truth and encountering the Christian faith. I am sure that this has happened to some of you and that you know several people who have followed this path. We are less faced with an inherited Christianity than one that is sought, chosen, and embraced. And of course, there is a transmission that takes place there. There's a kind of momentum that comes from the individual themselves. It is therefore more qualitative, and we find more people who are described as converts, who talk about the moment where they chose Christianity as their path. And conversion here is not referring necessarily to a conversion from one faith tradition to another. Sometimes it means discovering a new faith tradition. Of course, we need to know how to understand and accompany these people whose initial period of faith can be surprising and intense. I am also certain that religious communities have welcomed several converts, some of whom have remained and others who have continued on their way. And your work of transmission then towards a faith that is more inscribed in the greater Christian tradition is very important. Going from an emotional conversion, an individual personal conversion, yes, going from an emotional conversion to a full and holistic Christian life is an important step, and I think that religious communities have had an influence on these journeys that people take. So each journey then takes on a unique shape, punctuated by influences, readings, experiences, and questions. St. Augustine is a good example of a convert whose story overlaps with several other stories, and I've analyzed his work. You know that he had a magnificent conversion, a very touching story, in fact, and speaks to an experience of God, but he was surrounded by collectives. His mother, the Bishop Ambrose, the death of his friend, the discovery of spiritual ideas, reading important books of the canon that all led St. Augustine to his conversion. Now, point C, effects of the devaluation of religious practices. I want to leave some time for questions and for discussion, but what do I mean by this when I talk about effects of devaluation of religious practices? In my opinion, the devaluation of Christian practices in favor of inner spirituality and the devaluation of children's catechesis by deferring it to their own eventual choice contributes to the erosion of faith. Leonardo Boff in South America, a liberation theology that was very committed to social justice. But then there was also a moment where it was recognized that the more traditional practices are important too. Popular religious practices. You know, many parents for the last 20 years have been saying I don't want to raise my child in a Christian way. When my child grows up, they can choose. What a mistake. Why? Because faith is like a language that initiates you to a text, to a relationship with God. A recent survey concluded that non-religion, those who say they're not affiliated to any religion, is now more easily transmitted than religion. How was religion transmitted? Through practices. Uh, that is what always assured that young adults became and remained faithful. It was prayer, evening prayer with our parents, and when we were very young children. We need to leave these these footprints in the lives of people at a very young age. So families The families studied in this survey no longer had any material religious culture, objects, images, sculptures, etc. And these are also important. Values, of course, are important as well. But there was this divide inherited from the Second Vatican Council between popular religion and the pursuit of social justice. And I think we need to go beyond this divide because it has had an effect of hollowing out faith. We talk about the Word of God. We forget about the liturgy. Without practices, without religious practices, it's hard to sustain a faith and a faith life. And since the 1960s, I think there's been a devaluing of religious practices. So I'm going to show you some statistics on religion in Canada that illustrate what I've been saying. You see, this goes back to 2001. Many of you know some of these statistics. You see them on the screen. There's been a great increase of those who are unaffiliated. This doesn't mean that these people are not baptized. Many of them are baptized, but they no longer consider themselves affiliated with any particular Christian denomination. Catholics remain the largest Christian denomination in the country and in Quebec. Sorry for those of you who are elsewhere in the country, but I just want to show you these stats as well. There is a rapid decline in Catholicism, and 25% say that they have no religious affiliation versus 12% in 2011. And on religious practice of Quebecers, 14% say that they participate in a religious activity on a monthly basis. Okay, so I'll finish my presentation with a discussion of transmission of religious communities. The transmission of religious communities takes place in several ways, three of which I will mention here: the issue of succession, social transmission, and material transmission. Of course, transmission of the faith itself is important too. So, welcoming and training new members is part of the community's mission. In this regard, I have little to say except that this issue varies from one community to another. Martin Meunier has often shown this graphic abyss from the early 1960s, which marks the end of numerous religious vocations in Quebec. It's sort of a cliff. The statistics fall off a cliff. You see a deep decline from the 60s on. And simply put, professional vocations became disconnected from religious vocations, the two having been linked in Quebec beforehand. You became a teacher or a nurse because you became a member of a religious community. And so vocations became rarer, but they became qualitative and very thoughtful. And some communities have a more international base than others as well, where transmission is carried out in other countries and in other cultures. Then transmission of the mission has expanded to the collective of Quebec society, and religious communities stand out for their dynamism in this regard. They have made their mark on education, nursing, private colleges, certain professional training programs, the academic profession, and university research. It's obvious that this transmission doesn't end when a community or a congregation closes, shuts down. And then we have the material transmission that has also been very positive, with countless religious buildings in both large and small cities being repurposed for the benefit of society at large. Sometimes this is done because communities need money and they need to sell their buildings and their infrastructure to support their aging members. But there can be very beneficial transmission of this kind of material goods and infrastructure buildings. Also, discrete donations support many initiatives. And this is another kind of transmission. A little comment on this. I often said that when people don't have children, transmission happens in a different way. And more, we discover in philanthropy that when people don't have children and have amassed a certain fortune, they can use that to benefit society as a whole. The Killam's in the Maritimes, the widow died last year, and they had an enormous fortune, and it became the Canada Council for the Arts. So imagine this incredible benefit for society as a whole, and this was because they didn't have children. So the conclusion, and this is something that comes from my own experience. Should we remember, clarify, and update the contributions of communities, of religious communities? I have many questions on this subject, but I will give you two examples that tend to show that the memory of the immense contributions of Catholic religious communities would benefit from being clarified, updated, and disseminated further. It is already being done, but I think it should be done even more so. Just before the pandemic, I was invited by some nuns from the community of the Little Sisters of the Assumption. I didn't know this community beforehand. You'll let me know whether any of you are present from this community today. We were to plan a series of presentations to help them reflect on their difficult transition from the neighborhood house to the huge residence on Salaberry Street. For reasons you can well imagine, these presentations did not take place, as 2020 was to mark the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I don't know what became of them. I lost contact with them. I think of them often, but I completely lost contact. But during that one meeting that we did have, they told me that they had donated their building to the health sector, which had become the first CLSC. Their mission and actions had foreshadowed the CLSC model then in Quebec. And I asked them if this was commemorated in the building, and they seemed to think that it had not been commemorated in any way. There was no plaque, or so this is an erasing of the contribution of this community. My second example concerns a community founded in Quebec, the Adorers of the Most Precious Blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, founded by Aurélia Cahouette. I was invited by the city of Saint-Hyacinthe to an event celebrating the religious heritage of the city center, which is currently being redefined. Part of this heritage is the monastery of the Precious Blood, a magnificent building. It was given to the city of Saint-Hyacinthe. Again, another example of material transmission. It seems that nearly 20 nuns from this community still live in the city at the Résidence Les Jardins d'Aurélie. Some of them were present at my lecture. Some research seems to suggest that the texts dealing with this historical figure need to be updated. I'm talking about Aurélia Cahouette. You know, devotion to the precious blood in a society like ours is not very appealing to the masses. It is difficult to understand, even though this type of mysticism is still part of Christian tradition and experience. However, as I researched and talked to people, I discovered that these nuns were very connected to world news, praying for the resolution of major conflicts and problems. And this had been the case for a long time. They read the news, they prayed for the resolution of major conflicts and problems in the world. They received hundreds of letters a year and responded to them patiently. They sent replies to each of these letters. They welcomed people in distress to their convent. So I'm telling you, it was 1,000 times better than today's social media, what they did through their correspondence. This was social media before social media. They were full time contemplatives, focused on incredible correspondence with thousands of people. This monastery was a hive of communication. So I proposed at my lecture in Saint-Hyacinthe a reinterpretation of the monastery, including a lifestyle that combined solitude and fraternity. Are we not seeing a sharp increase in the number of people living alone today? So a monastic vocation can still inspire. We are seeing many people who live alone today. You see, these are two examples where transmission of what a community is and has been can be done in a better way, because there's really a genius of our Canadian history that is here. And my question is to you as communities, do you want to transmit this? There are historians doing it, there are academics working on this, but there is not really a synthesis, and it's hard to do because there are so many. So, in conclusion, while the public and scholarly memory of religious communities is multifaceted, there have been remarkable achievements, a lot of avant garde activities, transmission of tangible and intangible heritage, the mission, the religious missions. It seems to me that there is still work to be done in terms of memory, collective memory. Rightly or wrongly, I have the impression that the climate of reckoning that we find in Quebec make religious communities timid about these aspects. And because I'm not talking about just putting up plaques. There are a lot of values involved here, values of generosity and hospitality. So, rightly or wrongly, as I just said, I have the impression that the climate in Quebec, and particularly in Quebec, but in Canada more widely, make religious communities timid about doing this kind of transmission. But we are at a crossroads where this transmission is vital, in my humble opinion, and I think it would help our modern day societies live better if more of this transition was done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Solange. As Solange just said, she would like some interaction. So if you have questions or comments or experiences to share, any observations, you're welcome. So what we'll be doing, we'll ask you, because there are over 100 participants, 116, as I see. What would be more convenient if you want to make an intervention would be to use the reaction button at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand. So this will lead you to the front of our screens, because as there are more than 100 people, there are different screens. So if you want to ask a question, you want to make an intervention, share an experience, make a comment, don't hesitate. So raise your hand with the reaction button and we'll recognize you. And Sister Danielle, I suppose that the chat is also possible. I'd like to keep some records from that. So if it's possible for people to write their intervention on the chat, of course, the chat is open, so you can definitely use the chat. You have the button at the bottom of your Zoom screen just by the side of the React button. So if you want to add anything through the chat, and we'll keep an eye on the chat as well. So if you want to ask questions there, so to ask them of Solange. So what we could do also, Sister Danielle, if you agree, we could take a few questions. So, and like 3, 4 questions or reactions, I'll take notes. And so we'll have more people. We'll be able to listen to more people in this way. Okay? But I'm really anxious to listen to you. So people are getting ready. So I have the first raised hand. Raymond, if you want to unmute, first tell us in which language you'll be speaking. I'll be speaking French. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's really interesting. I'm focusing on, how did you call that, the intergenerational ghettos? I think that it's a problem we have in our large residences where we have an enormous pool of experiences, richness of experience, but they're all in silos and there's no transmission going on. And I find it so sad because those women who gave their lives, for us, it's mainly through education. So the transmission is not happening. And because we gave our grounds to the Montreal School Board, I was hoping that the young people, well, there could be some way of creating some contacts between our sisters at the residence and the young people who are going to school on our former property. So see that it's not happening. It's more than 4 years that it was done, and we're living side by side with those young people, and there was only one small attempt. Of course, the other idea, it's to keeping a memory. That's why we have the FAR project. We want to bring together all of our archives to make them available and make this richness available, especially for researchers in the future. I think it's a concern of ours how we can transmit before we leave in North America, especially because we are in other places, how to transmit this richness of our experience. It raises all kinds of extremely interesting questions. Thank you. Thank you, Raymond. Now I'll recognize Sandra, who'll be speaking English.
Sandra?
Thank you. Thank you, Solange. That was a fantastic presentation. I need to hear it again. So I have just 2 questions. From your experience of working with young people, how is the spiritual hunger of the youth being lived today? How is it being met? And how much innovation does religious life need to inspire or follow in order to meet that the spiritual hunger of today? It's because I think we're in the religious life is in a transition, and it has been before I joined, and it will be until I die, I know. So it's I'm interested to know from your experience. And I guess the other question is related. I was struck by your saying that there's an interplay between tradition and innovation, and how that interplay is shaping a new response to religious life is an interesting prospect for me to consider. So thanks for considering those, and thanks again for this talk.
It's a big question. Young people, their spiritual hunger, is it met? Innovation? Well, as I said, non-religion is more easily transmitted than religion, but it doesn't mean that they don't have spiritual hunger. One French author that I discovered when I did my book on youth was Rousseau was saying that the older adolescent was the age of religion. It's at this age that you have ideals, fundamental questions, but you have to get somewhere where you can ask these questions and have people around you to whom you can ask these questions or read or so it's some of them don't find the resources, but some of them do. How do we of course, what I would say is that social media have an odd effect, as you know, on many things. It's not always good, it's not always bad, but certainly they are looking for answers and contents on social media. But we still need a community. Just a last word. And often I've been told that in parishes, older people do not welcome younger people properly. So when I said that there was competition between generations, sometimes I think that because the elder people put so much effort in to sustain their parishes that they have a big problem letting it go to the younger people. There's a difficulty of transmitting in some Christian communities, but there's so much things we could say. So just a few ideas. Aurore, évidemment, écoutez, je n'ai pas.
Aurore, yes, of course. I did not speak. I just mentioned social justice. I mentioned the Little Sisters of the Assumption, whose mission it was to take care of the uh, health of poor families, and I spoke very generally of the mission of the communities. And I agree with you, that's what needs to be transmitted, and how your mission was transmitted. At times it was by creating works. Of course, I would like to know more about it. But of course, when I was talking about faith, it's included the care of the poor is a major pillar of the Christian tradition, yes. And I would be interested to know more about the way that you are currently transmitting this compassion to the disenfranchised. Well, I thank you, Aurore. Maybe we could receive other questions, Danielle. So, Pierrette, if you want to unmute, please. Oh, thank you. Thank you to Solange. Extremely enriching. And I'm asking the question, so how to transmit to the younger generations what our charism as a community. I'm thinking of the cloistered sisters who may be a model for the sisters living in the mother houses. So, but we have older sisters living in infirmaries today. But what we tried to do on our side is that, yes, we may be fortunate that we have an organization that you may know. It's a Carrefour Foi Spiritualité. So it is a way for us to reach out to people of different ages. And for a long time now, we are fortunate to be working with lay people. We have 5 staff members who are exactly the people we need to go in the field with the sisters who still can do it. So we really sponsored immigrant people. We sponsored over 100 families, and we're also working with refugee claimants. So it's a sister with other congregations who are giving us the possibility to help them establishing themselves in our country. I think of all that we can do with the young people, the 19 to 21-year-old are a group that we can meet through the Carrefour, and they're telling us what they're aspiring to, and it's intergenerational from the start. So it's a way to really reach out and have contact between young people and older sisters. Also, with the schools, we're working with the community organizations in the neighborhood, and we're fortunate to be in a neighborhood that's clearly multicultural and multi-religious as well. So our staff also are representing us on with these communities. So we are working with the Carrefour, but also with the food banks. We have La Corbeille. It can be also health services. So a group of ours went to the Christmas market and to long-term care institutions. So maybe we go ourselves, or we have a sister going with lay people in order to make sure that this will live on. We will leave, but it will be through the works of Marianne Lavallée. So she's our founder. So we created a fund, and so we are putting in the fund all of our surpluses. And we have a strong board of directors for the foundation with accountants and people of experience to make sure that they will continue to serve these groups and community groups. It will be a foundation to share and to be present through our staff. That's what we are doing. And we will not go in a depression. No, we are taking all the opportunities we have to make sure that this will go on. And of course, the sisters are not stopping working at 65, that's for sure. Thank you, Pierrette, for illustrating how with the Franciscan Oblates of St. Joseph, the mission is being transformed and is going on through lay people and through organizations and through a foundation. Would anyone else like to intervene at this point or ask a question? Well, good afternoon. I'm a Sister of the Sacred Heart of Jesus in Ottawa. André Guindon, I'll be speaking French. All along Madame Lefebvre's presentation, I was wondering, so what is our transmission, and what came spontaneously without taking too much time to think about it is as several congregations, we sold our large houses, but our sisters are living in public residence for older people with everybody. So, well, our sisters are living in residence with 100 people. Well, a third of them are our sisters. And I noticed that we may have had, there were prejudices about the religious congregations, but as they are living with other old people and even the people who are working there, so the ideas that they had about religious life clearly are evolving because they are meeting us. And something else about transmission is that we gave our archives to the BANQ, so the National Library and Archives of Quebec. So our archives are open for what can be opened. And another way as well, it's without our knowing it, but it's good for transmission. So we're working with Gestion Providencia. But all these people who are working with us, they're not necessarily Christian people. They may be Muslim, but we realize that as we are in contact with these people, their perception is evolving, and they are telling us that our way of living, our benevolence, our solidarity, well, it is also helping them to re-examine their own way of living. So, of course, all these lay people who are helping us at various levels to accompany our sisters or for the provincial council, all of this contributes also to the mission of the church. And as someone was saying, it contributes also to living benevolence and proximity. So that was.
So that's what I wanted to share. It was what I was reflecting on as I was listening to Madame Solange's presentation. So there are two hands up still, and we only have time for those two, Sister Joubert and then Catherine Grassouil, and then we'll let Madame Lefebvre respond to these last questions before handing it over to Alain to conclude. Thank you very much, Madame Solange, for your very interesting lecture, very rich in content. What I wanted to say is transmission can also be done through the countries where we are in mission. There are religious communities who are missionaries who are elsewhere in the world, and I think that's a very beautiful way of carrying out transmission. It's a beautiful heritage that is passed on and that these communities can leave. As you said, we can also transmit through projects with the new generations. For example, Zoom gives us this opportunity, as we just heard from someone else. I think it was Raymond. A number of sisters have had very interesting experiences using tools like Zoom, sharing our life, sharing our charism. I think that can also be a richness for transmitting to young people how we live and how we have lived. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sister Joubert. Catherine, over to you. Yes, thank you very much for the presentation and especially for those last explanations around sisters and brothers. We also have brothers in our different congregations who are asking themselves these questions. I discovered a program recently on French television. I'm from France, but I live in Quebec with my Canadian sisters. And the program was on the Sisters of Saint Jean de Bassel in Lorraine, in France. And they talk about how they have transmitted their aging and the aging of their community into uh, presence with young people, but of people of all ages, in their garden, in their houses, uh, monasteries, convents. It's an interesting way to transmit this sociability side uh, of religious life. Of course, there are contemplative sisters, there are sisters who live in a monastery, but there are also sisters who live out in the community, and that was their way to transmit this. I can send you the link if you're interested, and thank you very much. Thank you, Catherine. The link, if you have it, you could put it in the chat box for all of us. Solange, your last comments and answers to these questions, and then we will hand things over to Alain. I would be happy to hear even more questions. Well, it's the first time I've heard this wonderful idea, and I know that it would be a big deal for a number of communities. Instead of being in old age residences amongst yourselves, that religious be in public retirement homes. You know, my mother and father died in the Résidence Angelica on Gouin Boulevard in the north of Montreal, which was run by a religious, and there was a great presence of sisters and priests and in that residence. And if it's possible for some communities to do this, I encourage you to do it. It's not just the intergenerational transmission that has to take place, but also between peers of the same generation. And we can add services, religious communities always take great pride in taking care of their aging members in very specialized infirmaries that they've created so that the charism can be lived out in those last years of life. But having contact between people from religious communities and the general public, there can be some extraordinary opportunities there for communicating, for transmitting, and your presence is always remarkable wherever you are. So I find that to be a very interesting idea. This idea then of from André Guindon from Ottawa. And then yes, you transmit. Joubert said so. Congregations, communities who have a presence in other countries, you do a lot of work through your members in those countries, and I think that form of transmission continues to be important. The documentary, this idea of sociability, socializing, allows me to conclude with this idea. You fund a lot of things. You provide a lot of support for works in different neighborhoods with marginalized people. You transmit your material goods. You sell your buildings often at a reasonable price to be used for the public good. But don't forget, it's not just leaving a legacy for the sake of leaving a legacy. No, it's also each religious community has a form of genius that comes from their original mission, from their founder, from their charism. And it's a form of genius that is both religious and secular, and they both need to be transmitted. You need to speak about the Christian faith that sustained you, that continues to sustain your missions, but the whole lay at secular. Why do we help the poor? Why do we help the marginalized? Because helping the marginalized, everyone talks about that. It's a great, I think, victory of Christianity, even though there is still a lot of injustice in the world, but there is a certain sensitivity in our broader culture that comes from the Bible, that comes from a certain Judeo-Christian tradition, and is shared by other faith traditions. Islam was mentioned, and we can be proud of that. But I question you and place this challenge before you. The monastery of the precious blood brought this to light to me because I was looking for things online, and that's what I was saying. This genius of communication, there's no trace of it. We need to have some kind of a trace of it, and we need to invest in media, web platforms, not just books for researchers. There's something to be done here so that the genius of each of your communities, the charism of the original founding, be accessible going forward, because I think that it can be a model. And so I really urge you to invest in this. Name clearly the genius, the religious and the secular genius of your congregation, and make sure that that is left to us, to the broader society, in a clear way, that it be transmitted. There can even be in social media different ways of doing so. Don't be always in your modesty and your humility and your discretion. I have a lot of respect for you, as you can probably hear in my tone, and I have so much recognition for what you've contributed to Canadian society and elsewhere in the world, what your predecessors have done and what you continue to do, each of you. And my profound desire personally is that this be transmitted more widely, communicated more widely, broadcast more widely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Solange. You asked the question, what does it mean to transmit? What is this desire? And you answered this question in a magnificent fashion by launching a number of challenges for us. This theme of transmission, is an important one for us right now. We are experiencing a certain phenomenon in the West, in Western congregations, the coming to an end and completion, coming to completion for many communities, and this is a time then to reflect. Congregations want to transmit, and what you have done today And what we're trying to do all year this year is to be conscious of what it means to transmit. So a huge thank you to you.